transportation industry on the cusp of autonomous operation during the next decade, the subject of how this technology may be used in armed conflict was bound to come up. After all, it was DARPA, the research and development arm of the Pentagon, who first held competitions for autonomous vehicles about 15 years ago. You knew that at some point they were looking to weaponize it. We have questions, don't we?
Yeah.
Let me start with asking the first question. And I'm going to be honest, we are not going to even begin to do this subject justice. But we do want to introduce it to your mind for you to think about. Because it's something that's going to happen, whether you like it or not. This is a thing. So let me start with this. Can a computer algorithm learn to fight wars ethically? First of all, war? That seems like an oxymoron to me.
It is. It is, absolutely.
I mean, actually getting involved in a conflict to take a life. I understand defense. I mean, everybody wants to be safe. And if you fire on me, yes, you better believe we're going to respond. Got that part. But in other situations where a war may be started, I don't know. Or you get sucked into a war because two other parties are involved and because you have a pact to support the one, that's where it gets murky. The good news is, if you can call it that West Point cadets are actually being confronted with these ethical questions and attempting to deal with how they might respond or the fact that they're going to have to respond during their military careers as this becomes a thing. You're just sitting there, I don't know, and I know you have so much to say on this subject. Just start anywhere. You do.
What all can AI be used to figure out? And is this the top of the list for us right now? I mean, they can't help figure out how to de-escalate the conflict. Maybe that's what the question's pointing to. Can we figure out how to make food more efficiently and cheaper so we can feed everybody? Can we figure out how to make homes so that we can build houses for everybody? But no, we're asking questions about, can they fight a war ethically? It's only as ethical as the person who designs it. And automatically it's not going to be one person, right? It's going to be a bunch of people. And all it's going to take is one probably not very ethical person, in whose hands it's not just be in America's hands. And not that I trust America with it either, to be honest. I mean,
but let's deal with that.
Yeah.
Because it's all not one world. And because it's more than just us here. We're only 5% of the population.
Yep.
At some point, either voluntarily or involuntarily, we're going to have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. I would rather they tackle the question. I mean, there's a lot of unpleasant things that happen in the world that we have to deal with as a country.
It's interesting that's at West Point Cadet where they're doing that. I mean, we got a lot of scientists there too, and people that aren't.
But these are your
West Point cadets.
Yes, these are your future officers. These are the people under pressure in combat that are going to have to either make decisions or react to or respond to this interaction. Mm-hmm. So to me, on the one hand, while, I don't think it's the place of the military to attempt to solve the ills of a country or the world, because that's a whole nother conversation that I have way too many concerns about. Mm-hmm. Our military budget.
Our track record's not
Yeah. But honestly, nobody will argue that we should have the ability to defend ourselves, that we should be able to respond in kind to any threats against the United States. I don't think anybody will argue that. By the same token, there's a lot of questions, and this is not new. It started with the use of drones almost 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's what keeps coming to my mind, too.
And there's a lot of unanswered questions as the rules of engagement, the terms of engagement, the when, where, how, at what level of percent of assurity do you choose to engage?
Yep.
How do you know that you know that you know? And how do you minimize innocent people getting hurt?
Absolutely.
That have nothing to do with the mission.
You've heard that argument for drones, but then it's like, how sure are we? Do we know the full effects of people injured, people hurt? I mean, we've had to force government to basically acknowledge civilian deaths in other countries in the first place. So I imagine it's just getting messier and messier. And how far does it go? Is there a kill switch? How do you turn these things off? Who's in control? What kind of line of chain of command is there?
The thing that kills me is, and I quote, this is my own quote, the worst nightmare of every post-civilization sci-fi flick ever made.
Yeah.
You go to any sci-fi flick made in the last 30 years, and it gets down to machines and computers making decisions, decided that mankind wasn't worth keeping or saving, and gets some sort of awareness of its own and decides to take mankind out because y'all can't, y'all can't make these decisions. We're going to make them for you.
Yep.
And I mean, I would like to think that that's extreme, but that also leads into a deeper, darker rabbit hole that we do not have time to go down. At what point does AI become self-aware, or will it ever? And, that's.
Yeah. I was reading a book. It's to do with war and certain things. And one of the quotes I read last night before I started reading this article, how tech is used depends in part on the values and organization of society. And it just doesn't seem like we're, I don't know, in the best place right now. But
let me throw this in as a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Colonel Christopher Corpola, the director of West Point's Robotics Center, and an earnest sparkplug of a man in both demeanor and frame, and I quote, considers the deployment of such killing machines to be innovative, you can't get around it. It's gonna happen. And wants to ensure that these officers in training are prepared to cope with them. Now, I should back up and say that this, what we're quoting from, is a recent article that appeared in the Washington Post magazine that talked about this. And honestly, this is only part one. We're going to revisit this because there's no way that we've got the time to cover everything in terms of concerns. But again, we take a broad view of mobility. This is a form of mobility because it has so many ramifications. Now, we've talked off air and we've readily acknowledged that a lot of what the military funds in terms of innovation and invention has benefited mankind in general, in the United States in particular.
Yeah, sometimes war, we're talking pushes technology. Sometimes technology ends up becoming into war, like something you create offhandedly ends up being, like the atom bomb we discussed, splitting atoms. Sometimes
nuclear power.
Sometimes things we funded for war have ended up having practical uses, like tractor wheels, basically that we use for tanks.
Tractor treads.
Yeah.
And the saying I was trying to remember, I just remember turning swords into plowshares, which is basically converting what President Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex into more of a civilian goods complex for consumption.
Yeah.
Which is what happened right after World War II. Ironically enough, back then, they used the might of American know-how and industry to support a war effort, which basically largely lifted us out of the Depression, which raged for 10, 12 years prior.
I think, I go back, let's maybe just have a war on poverty.
They tried that in the 60s. That's another
While we were in Vietnam.
Before we were in Vietnam, actually.